Let's move on to this shareholder lawsuit. So, Brandon, why don't you tell us just a bit about the background? Because these were multiple lawsuits that were consolidated, first filed back in 2023, and this is very much germane to the TKO merger.
So let's pull up File and Serve Express, okay, as we've all been monitoring
on everyone's bookmarks.
So this is not in federal court. This is in the good old Delaware Court of Chancery, which is where all the best lawsuits happen because everybody's incorporated in Delaware for business reasons, I guess. So in November 2023, this is when this all started. As I recall, Bloomberg broke this story that there's a shareholder lawsuit. There's this group, and it's usually this is what it is. It's pension funds, it's retirement funds who invest in probably tons of things. And one of the things that they invested in is they're saving money for their employees is WWE, and they're alleging that Vince McMahon forced his way back into the company, and he just predetermined that he wanted to do this deal with Ari Emanuel, his friend at Endeavor, who he had known for many, many years, and that resulted in WWE being undervalued. Now, there's a lot more that we can go into here, but that's the top level gist of what's happening here. They're alleging that Vince McMahon, yes, he forced his way back into the company, and then he decided that he's going to do a company transaction and pretend to shop the business around, but he really knew all along he was just going to make a deal with Ari Emanuel for specific reasons. So that began in November 2023 with the Ohio Pension Fund and a university professor named Dennis Palkin, who's been involved in previous W class action shareholder lawsuits. And then we had in April 2024 another pension fund, the City of Pontiac Retirees Fund, came along and also filed a lawsuit that was quickly consolidated into this lawsuit. And they
just want the 1987 attendance records, I think.
I hope so. That's probably what they're trying to clarify. And this lawsuit is basically what makes this report new. This is not something that I had read, or I don't believe anybody has reported on, even though it is some 10 months old. And this goes into a lot of detail that we'll get to. But it's been consolidated into one lawsuit, as we talked about briefly last week before I had read everything about this. There have been a ton of subpoenas. Every firm that was involved, and there are many firms involved with a complicated merger like this one, they've all been subpoenaed for various records. All of the board members of the board have been subpoenaed, or they've got their notice of service of interrogatories. They're being asked questions. So this lawsuit is very much still going on.
So in this lawsuit, they were able to obtain a portion of these meeting minutes after a legal demand was issued. So this allows stockholders to be able to inspect company records. And the minutes that were released, while somewhat redacted, there was at least some interesting aspects to what was going on involving the board of directors in June of 2022, which is when the first reporting came to light from the Wall Street Journal regarding the allegations against Vince McMahon, and learning for the first time that Manjit Singh and Ignace Lahoud attempted to resign from the board the day after that first Wall Street Journal report. But it was Stephanie McMahon, then still a member of the board, who was able to convince the two to stay on board, which they ultimately would. And then 2 days later is when Vince McMahon steps down on an interim basis while still remaining with the company, and Stephanie is named interim CEO and chairwoman.
Yes. So the minutes, so these are records apparently that are made to record what happens at WWE board meetings. These are not public. They were not made exhibits as part of this, but they were referenced and quoted in the complaints that are public. And as you said, there's a lot of things that are redacted here, but some things are not. And apparently under a law in Delaware, you can, if you're a shareholder and you have a proper purpose, you can make this legal demand. And WWE had to turn over these meeting minutes to both of these litigants. So yes, this is at the time of, so remember it's May 2022 that Stephanie has announced her temporary leave of absence. She goes on temporary leave, not as a board member, but just as an executive. So she's still serving on the board. And then in June, the Wall Street Journal breaks the first story about the NDA hush payments and allegations of sexual misconduct against McMahon. And as you said, it's the next day According to the plaintiffs who are suing WWE, let's be clear, but according to their references of the meeting minutes, they're saying that on the day after that, some members of the board, including Ignacio Laud, Manjit Singh, who eventually did resign later, they threatened to resign, but Stephanie convinced them not to, at least for the time being. What else is going on there?
So as the months go on, we do see some changes to the board of directors. Connor Schell and Erica Nardini both leave the board, although those are not painted as reasons attached to Vince McMahon. Their filings stating that it was not due to any dispute or disagreement with the company, its management, or any matter relating to the company's operations, policies, or practices. So take that on face value that they made these decisions, but it is coming shortly after this. July is when Connor Schell leaves. September is when Erica Nardini leaves the board of directors. And then the special investigation begins, and Manjit Singh is the lead investigator of that.
Jeffrey Speed is. Manjit Singh is the lead independent director of the board in general. Jeffrey Speed is the lead person on the investigation.
Okay. So Jeffrey Speed will come into focus in just a minute here when we talk about some of these changes. Now, we have gone over all of the turmoil, for lack of a better term, the end of December into early January, when Vince McMahon approaches the board, states his intent to rejoin the company. He is told that the board unanimously disagrees with this suggestion by Vince McMahon, who exercises his power and is able to reinsert himself as the executive chairman and removes several board members, including Jeffrey Speed, and puts George Barrios, Michelle Wilson into those spots. And it's upon Vince McMahon's return to the board of directors that Ignacio Lahoud and Manjit Singh do officially resign from the board in January 2023. So we have quite a change of the makeup of the board of directors over these 7 months.
Right. And so as we followed at the time, right, when these allegations came out, they were originally reported in June by the Wall Street Journal, but the board knew about this for a few months in advance because there was an email sent purportedly from a friend of Janelle Grant who disclosed how she was allegedly mistreated by Vince McMahon and by John Laurinaitis. After these stories broke with the Journal, the board announced that they were going to start their special committee investigation. And by the time, so they did all that, and it was supposed to be an investigation into misconduct allegations, into the company culture. Vince went on, interim. He still headed creative, but he stepped down on an interim basis. Stephanie became the interim CEO and chairwoman for the time being. And this investigation happened, and according to the plaintiffs' references to these meeting minutes, they call it a sham investigation. They say that that there was hardly any report. What does it say here? It conducted a sham investigation of the allegations against McMahon. The special committee facilitated the cover-up by ensuring that they received no written materials throughout the entirety of that committee's existence. The special committee did not interview McMahon's victims, which is consistent with Grant's claims, did not reprimand or otherwise censure McMahon, received no interview memoranda, which I assume would be records of interviews, reviewed no evidence, made no factual findings, and issued no report. By the time of WWE's Q3 report, WWE is putting in their filings that, remember this is our favorite phrasing, that the investigation is substantially complete. However, they note that even after that, after they're saying to the public that this investigation is substantially complete, they've got records in the meeting minutes showing that there were recommendations still happening. They were still having meetings about this investigation. The special committee did not provide any recommendations to the full board until October 27th. And even then, the special committee merely recommended the investigation continue under the supervision of the audit committee, the compensation committee, and a newly created committee called the demand committee. No investigation had been, quote unquote, completed in any sense of the word. I'm reading from the plaintiff's complaint. But the release provided McMahon with an opening to return. He was able to return because at that time he held controlling voting power, and he was able to ultimately, in January, force his way back into the company.
I guess the other kind of interesting aspect to it is that after Vince McMahon's return to the board, they make the announcement that it has been he has now been unanimously voted to return to the board. And in this complaint, it lists the fact that Paul Levesque, Nick Khan, and Steve Koonin, who is still part of the TKO board, reversed course, that Steve Payman did not attend, board member Michelle McKenna abstained, and I guess it's a question mark regarding if, in fact, Stephanie McMahon took part in this vote as well. I guess that's not made as clear. But then she herself resigns from all duties from WWE the very next day after Vince's return, including stepping down from the board of directors.
Right. And it does, let's see, it does make clear that Manjit Singh and Ganesh Lahoud stepped down because of Vince's return, which Lahoud has said to the LA Times, I believe it was, but I believe around the time of the merger itself. But that makes it clear that, that's why they were stepping down. Yeah, it's not made clear if, I mean, based on the timing that's described here, you would think that Stephanie would be there and had not yet resigned, but she resigns the following day.
And just wrapping this up here, it also notes the fact that other bidders for the company, they were willing to cash out all of the WWE investors, but the board pushed for the deal with Endeavor because Vince McMahon, A, would have a role in this new company, as well as the top executives being heavily bonused that Brandon went over.
Right.
I think
they're alleging that, Vince was not going to, their theory here, right? Their allegation is that Vince was not going to take any other deal because that would have cashed him out and that would have allowed that new owner to keep him out of the company. They frame him as toxic and nobody wants to deal with him. And only Endeavor, only his friend Ari Emanuel was going to allow him to become part of the company. And then we have, we can think back to those, to the CNBC interview where Ari insists that, oh my God, yes, we have to have Vince McMahon as part of this company.
Yes. And the fact that, that had come out as well, that Vince McMahon was able to negotiate more equity out of his inclusion.
Right, which is bizarre. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a pretty interesting complaint to go through. And I think it will be very difficult to argue that that this sale, that this has not been of great benefit of value to the company, but it's also looking at it from the perspective of these shareholders. But more importantly, it's information that they have at least been privy to through these meeting minutes that do give us some insight into quite a turbulent period when it comes to the shakeup on the board of directors.
Yeah, and to add some information, that we get a little bit of light shed on who the bidders were. We already believed that Liberty Media was one of the bidders who was looking into acquiring WWE in some form. That's consistent with what we see here. Again, there's a lot of redactions, but Liberty Media has been subpoenaed here. And we also, something that's new to me is among the information that's being subpoenaed is information related to an entity called the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, which is a sovereign wealth fund with the United Arab Emirates. Maybe they were one of the financial sponsors, perhaps that's referred to in WWE's narrative of how this merger came together. But that's new information to me, and that I certainly took notice of that. And Vestry Light has been subpoenaed as well, and that is the firm that specializes in sexual misconduct investigations. That's the firm that the board brought in to help them with this investigations, and so they've been subpoenaed as well.